It began with a single photograph, one that no one could quite explain. Paris, the city of perfection, the capital of couture, the stage where only the truly invited dare to shine. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But that day, the flashes caught something unexpected. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, stepping out of a black car in a blinding white ensemble. Head held high, expression controlled, as if she belonged there. The crowd murmured. Some gasped. Others whispered the obvious question. Was she even invited? That moment set off a chain of whispers that spread faster than wildfire. Because behind the elegance of the runway, behind the flashing cameras and the polished smiles, a storm was already brewing. Within the sleek walls of Balenciaga's Spring-Summer 2026 show, one name was suddenly echoing in every corridor: Meghan Markle. Not because of what she wore, but because of how she got there. Paris Fashion Week is sacred ground for designers, stylists, and editors. It is not an event where anyone can simply show up. Every chair, every guest, every handshake carries weight. Invitations are a currency of respect. They are not requested, they are earned. And yet, according to insiders, Meghan's appearance that day was not planned by the brand, not coordinated by her team, and not cleared by Balenciaga's creative direction. She had, quite literally, walked herself into the spotlight. But that was only the surface. What came next turned whispers into headlines, headlines into chaos, and chaos into scandal. Days after the show, rumors began circulating that Meghan had sent a series of direct messages to Balenciaga's top designer, Pierpaolo Pacioli, pleading for access, referencing shared causes, humanitarian ideals, and global partnerships. To the untrained eye, it looked like simple outreach. To those in the fashion world, it looked like desperation. The kind that could shatter reputations. So how did the Duchess of Sussex go from royal elegance to a symbol of overreach in the world of fashion's elite? What did Pierpaolo really find in those messages? And what does this reveal about the woman who has spent years trying to redefine herself? Not as a royal, but as a brand. Let's rewind the moment. The day of the Balenciaga show. Bright morning sun over Paris. A street lined with cameras, security cordons, and the usual frenzy of fashion journalists. The front row was set. Anna Wintour, Kim Kardashian, Dua Lipa, and a handful of fashion insiders. The brand's director of PR had triple-checked the seating plan. There was no mention of Meghan Markle. Yet, just before the first model took the runway, a whisper ran through the crowd. She's here. Eyewitnesses recall a strange pause as Meghan stepped out. The media lenses turned toward her as if pulled by gravity. Some of the Balenciaga staff reportedly froze. A few whispered into their earpieces. The event director's face turned pale. She wasn't on the list. She wasn't cleared. But she was standing there, waving slightly, smiling faintly, as if the whole world had been waiting for her. The tension in that moment is something only insiders could describe. One assistant reportedly muttered under her breath, "Who approved this?" Another replied quietly, "No one did," but the cameras didn't care. They captured every frame. Meghan's confident walk, the sweep of her coat, the way the flashlights reflected off her outfit. For a few seconds, she had stolen the show. But Paris doesn't forget breaches like that easily. Within hours, speculation flooded social media. Was Meghan invited? Did she force her way in? Did Balenciaga approve this? Fashion journalists started digging, and the story started unraveling. A week later, a post appeared on an insider blog known for its connections to fashion houses. The headline was short, sharp, and devastating. The Duchess who invited herself. The article alleged that Meghan had personally messaged Pierpaolo Pacioli multiple times before the show, hinting at shared humanitarian projects and suggesting that attending Balenciaga's event could amplify their mutual mission for global inclusion and women's empowerment. But what shocked insiders wasn't just the tone. It was the persistence. The messages, reportedly polite but urgent, were described as unrelenting. Pierpaolo, known for his refined discretion, was said to have ignored the first few. The final one, however, was described as unmistakably forward. According to one fashion source, Meghan wrote something along the lines of, "It would be a privilege to attend and show support. I believe our values align." For Pierpaolo, that was a line crossed. Balenciaga has strict boundaries around its guest list. Access is controlled through agencies, PR coordinators, and mutual partnerships. No one, not even global figures, can simply message the designer and expect a seat. It isn't done. It's an unwritten law of couture, and Meghan had just broken it. Still, on the day of the show, she arrived. Some believe she used her personal contacts in Paris. Others say her team staged a photo walk near the venue, counting on cameras to do the rest. Either way, it worked. The image of Meghan Markle at Balenciaga went viral across the world. The narrative she wanted, polished, fashionable, relevant, had been captured. But the story behind it was already spiraling out of her control. Because that same night, an anonymous source close to Pierpaolo reportedly leaked screenshots of her messages to a fashion columnist. They weren't published immediately, but the whispers spread. Meghan had invited herself. What was supposed to be a glamorous appearance suddenly looked like a publicity stunt gone wrong. And that's where the story takes a darker turn. Fashion, like royalty, thrives on exclusivity and protocol. In both worlds, you don't break the rules, you bend them quietly, with charm, with influence, with grace. But you never, ever beg your way in. For Meghan, who had once declared independence from royal control, this incident revealed something else entirely. A desperate attempt to be seen, to belong, to be acknowledged by the very elite she once criticized. Those who know Pierpaolo say he was furious, not publicly, but privately. He reportedly told colleagues that the runway is for those who respect its purpose. A simple sentence, but loaded with meaning. Insiders took it as his quiet response to the entire fiasco. Fashion editors whispered that Balenciaga had quietly blacklisted certain PR agencies after the event. And yet, amidst the silence, Meghan's team remained unapologetic. Statements from her representatives emphasized shared creative values and universal appreciation of artistry. But the world wasn't convinced. The comments section under the viral photographs turned into a battlefield. Some defended her confidence. Others called it arrogance. What few realized was that this wasn't just another social appearance. It was a calculated attempt at redemption. After months of fading from the public conversation, this was Meghan's re-entry strategy. A new chapter, a new image. The woman who had once stood at the balcony of Buckingham Palace now wanted a seat in the front row of Paris's fashion elite. But here's the question that hangs in the air. Was this an act of ambition or desperation? Was Meghan truly seeking alignment with fashion's artistic world, or was she chasing relevance? At any cost? Every scandal begins with a decision, and this one began with a message. The line between confidence and overreach is thin, and Meghan Markle, on that Paris morning, may have stepped over it without realizing. Or perhaps she knew exactly what she was doing, betting on her fame to open doors that were never meant to be opened. Either way, she succeeded in one thing. She made herself the story again. But in doing so, she also made an enemy of the one designer whose reputation rests on respect, not spectacle. And Pierpaolo Pacioli, calm, precise, and famously private, was not a man easily manipulated by glamour or status. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who had seen enough. "Fashion is about invitation," he said quietly during an interview days later. "Not intrusion." It was one sentence. No names, no accusations, but everyone in the industry understood exactly who he meant. And that's where our story begins, with a duchess who couldn't resist the allure of the spotlight, a designer who refused to bend his principles, and a scandal that turned a single photograph into a symbol of everything wrong with celebrity ambition. But what came next would ignite a debate that still hasn't faded. Because this wasn't just about one event in Paris. It was about power, perception, and the silent war between fame and respect. And when the next leak hit the internet, it proved one thing. Meghan Markle's quest to control her narrative had just met its toughest opponent yet. The air in Paris had barely settled after that explosive week. The story was supposed to end with a few photos, a handful of social media posts, and another royal headline that would fade in a few days. But that's not what happened. What started as a fleeting fashion moment evolved into a full-scale conversation about access, authenticity, and ambition. A conversation that stretched from the front rows of couture to the drawing rooms of London. And at the heart of it all stood two very different figures. Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, and Pier Paolo Pacioli, the Italian designer whose name had become synonymous with integrity in modern fashion. Those who know the designer describe him as a man of calm precision, someone who believes that artistry has to mean something. His work is quiet but powerful, never screaming for attention, never chasing the latest trend. That's what made his reaction so chilling. For him, the Balenciaga show wasn't just an event. It was a message to the world about craftsmanship, discipline, and elegance. And when that sacred space was disrupted by a moment of uninvited glamour, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an insult. Inside the fashion house, the tension grew long after the applause had faded. Assistants replayed footage, managers reviewed guest logs, and emails were exchanged late into the night. Someone, somewhere, had to explain how one of the most recognizable women in the world had managed to walk past security, sit among the elite, and dominate the press coverage of a show she was never supposed to attend. The PR department scrambled for answers, but none of them made sense. Her name simply wasn't there. There was no official correspondence, no verified pass, no seat allocation. Yet the images were everywhere. And then came the leaks. Anonymous messages began appearing on fashion forums and in private journalist group chats. Short, teasing sentences hinting that there was more to the story. She reached out herself. He didn't invite her. He's furious. The tone was unmistakably sharp, as though someone inside Balenciaga had decided to let the truth out in small, deliberate doses. Within 48 hours, several major fashion reporters had received the same tip. Meghan Markle's appearance wasn't a coincidence. It was orchestrated by her. That's when Pier Paolo's name first appeared in connection with the messages. Insiders whispered that the Duchess had contacted him directly, circumventing the usual layers of PR and coordination. To outsiders, it might seem harmless, a celebrity asking to attend a fashion show. But in the world of haute couture, it was a breach of etiquette on the same level as showing up to Buckingham Palace without a summons. You simply don't do it. Especially not to a designer like Pier Paolo, who built his reputation on dignity and respect for the craft. People began speculating about what the messages said. Some claimed they were polite and flattering. Others described them as insistent, even manipulative. Phrases like shared vision, mutual inspiration, and supporting each other's mission kept surfacing. There was something calculated about it, the kind of tone designed to sound humble while pushing for an outcome. A former fashion publicist explained it best. It's like when someone flatters you into saying yes. You're not sure whether to be impressed or uncomfortable. And Pier Paolo? He didn't respond. At least not at first. He was known for his discipline, the kind of man who lets silence do the talking. Those close to him said he showed the messages to his assistant, sighed, and simply said, "We don't do this." That was the end of it. Or so he thought. When Meghan arrived at the show a few days later, it wasn't just unexpected. It was shocking. Pier Paolo reportedly turned to one of his coordinators in disbelief. "She's here?" he asked. The staff confirmed it. They had checked. Her name wasn't on any list. But by then it was too late. The cameras had captured her entrance. The story was already alive. To the outside world, it looked like a moment of grace and confidence. A royal-turned celebrity reclaiming her place among the elite. But inside the venue, it was chaos. One intern described it later. It was like watching a scene from a movie where everything goes wrong in slow motion. No one knew what to do. You can't exactly ask her to leave. But everyone knew she wasn't supposed to be there. Pier Paolo didn't make a scene. He simply turned away, composed as always. Yet those who saw him that day said his expression changed. A flicker of disbelief mixed with quiet anger. For him, the runway wasn't just a platform for fashion. It was a temple of discipline and artistry. And now, that sanctity had been disrupted by someone chasing headlines. After the show, while most guests attended the after-party, Pierpaolo reportedly stayed behind, meeting with his team. The conversation was brief, controlled, and tense. The brand couldn't make a public statement that would ignite a scandal. But they also couldn't let this pass unnoticed. The instruction was simple. Stay quiet, keep records, and prepare for questions. The next morning, the first reports began appearing. Uninvited Duchess crashes Balenciaga show. Pierpaolo blindsided by royal arrival. Fashion house silent amid controversy. Each article added another layer to the growing storm. Within hours, Meghan's team released a vague statement emphasizing creative collaboration and support between global icons and artists. But the words rang hollow. The fashion world could tell the difference between collaboration and intrusion. Pierpaolo's silence became the loudest statement of all. In interviews that followed, he chose his words carefully. He never mentioned names. He didn't need to. When asked about celebrity influence in fashion, he replied, "Fashion should invite truth, not performance." The line was printed in headlines around the world. Readers connected the dots instantly. Behind closed doors, the fallout spread fast. Other designers whispered about tightening their guest lists. Publicists warned clients about the Balenciaga incident. And Meghan's name quietly appeared on the list of cautionary tales, alongside celebrities who had overstepped their boundaries in the relentless pursuit of relevance. But the question still lingered. Why would she risk this? What did she gain from showing up uninvited? Some said it was about image, a calculated effort to align herself with high fashion again after months of unfavorable press. Others believed it was personal, a need to prove that she could still command attention without royal titles, without invitations, without approval. There's a certain irony in that. Meghan had once spoken about breaking free from systems of control, rejecting hierarchy, rejecting the obsession with status. Yet here she was, inserting herself into one of the most exclusive hierarchies in the world. It wasn't freedom she sought, it was validation. And that's what made this moment different from all the scandals that came before. This wasn't about the royal family or politics or charity. This was about ambition stripped bare, the raw, human desire to be seen, to matter, to be relevant in rooms that no longer send you invitations. By the end of that week, the world had already chosen sides. Her defenders praised her courage. Her critics saw desperation. But no one ignored her. And in the world Meghan lives in, that might have been the only goal that mattered. For Pierpaolo, however, it was the beginning of a reckoning. Because when the private messages finally surfaced, and when insiders confirmed their authenticity, the quiet dignity he had maintained turned into something sharper. He would never engage in public drama. But his next collection, his next statement, his next interview, all of it would carry an undertone of disappointment directed at a single moment that broke an unspoken code. That's how this story begins. With an uninvited guest, a silent designer, and a fashion world forced to ask itself what happens when ambition replaces respect. And as we move deeper into the events that followed, the answer becomes clear. This wasn't just another celebrity headline. It was the first crack in a carefully crafted image, and once it split open, there was no closing it again. The days that followed felt like a slow-motion collapse of a carefully staged illusion. The glamour, the smiles, the perfectly timed photo ops. All of it started to look like pieces of a performance falling apart in real time. For Meghan, the Paris Fashion Week appearance had been a statement of rebirth, a chance to show the world that she could exist outside royal titles and controversies. But instead, it became a case study in how quickly the elite world can turn on someone it once admired. The first to break the silence weren't tabloids or gossip pages. It was the fashion community itself. Stylists, editors, and insiders began whispering in hushed tones about how the Duchess had crossed a line that wasn't meant to be crossed. "There are rules," one veteran publicist said off record, and she ignored all of them. The fashion industry thrives on exclusivity. Access isn't just granted. It's earned through reputation, relationships, and trust. The moment those boundaries are broken, everything else begins to crumble. Pierpaolo Pacioli, for his part, had built an empire on the foundation of respect. He wasn't just a designer. He was an artist who believed in silence, discipline, and restraint. In a world of spectacle, he represented quiet strength. That's why his reaction was so significant. He didn't need to raise his voice. His disapproval could be felt in his stillness, in the way he allowed his work to speak instead of his words. Those who were in the room with him after the show said he didn't express anger, just disappointment. And for someone like him, that carried far more weight. As the news spread, the narrative began to shift from confusion to confrontation. The idea that Meghan had invited herself to one of the most exclusive shows of the season ignited debates across social media. Was she bold or disrespectful? Empowered or entitled? The line between confidence and desperation had never seemed thinner. Supporters argued that she was simply refusing to be excluded, that she was claiming space in an industry that often shuts doors to outsiders. But her critics saw something different. A pattern of self-promotion disguised as activism, a hunger for attention masquerading as Still, Meghan remained composed in public. She smiled for the cameras, appeared confident at charity events, and avoided addressing the incident directly. Her silence, however, spoke volumes. To many, it looked like pride. To others, it looked like defiance. But to those who understood how carefully she manages her image, it looked like strategy, waiting for the storm to pass before resurfacing with something new. Yet, in Paris, the damage was already done. Balenciaga's staff, who had worked tirelessly to maintain precision and order, reportedly issued new internal guidelines about event security and guest verification. Other designers followed suit, ensuring that every invitation was checked twice. The Markle incident, as some quietly called it, became a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. It wasn't malicious gossip. It was a warning about how fragile the boundaries of prestige could be. And Pierpaolo's reputation? Untouched. If anything, stronger. His quiet firmness elevated him in the eyes of his peers. He had handled the situation without spectacle, without cruelty, but with unmistakable authority. It reminded everyone why his name carries such respect, because in an age of noise, he stands for silence that commands attention. Meanwhile, the Duchess was left to face the consequences of her own design. Her attempt to control the narrative had given birth to another one entirely. What was meant to be a statement of power became a portrait of vulnerability. The woman who once symbolized modern reinvention now found herself portrayed as someone trying too hard to stay relevant in a world that was already moving on. The truth is, Meghan's story has always been about tension, between image and reality, between independence and approval, between rebellion and belonging. And Paris was simply the latest stage in that ongoing struggle. The difference this time was that the world didn't seem as willing to play along. The introduction ends here. A story that began with a photograph, exploded with a message, and exposed a much larger question. What happens when someone who has built an empire on controlling perception suddenly loses control of it? Paris had seen its share of chaos. From the flash of paparazzi at the Ritz to the roaring crowds outside Dior and Chanel, Fashion Week was always an exercise in controlled disorder. But this was different. The Balenciaga Women's Wear Spring Summer 2026 show wasn't just another runway event. It was an international spectacle, an intersection of art, money, and power where every face in the front row mattered. And on that particular morning, beneath the crisp Parisian light and the echo of clicking heels on cobblestone, something unusual was about to unfold. The venue was set like a cathedral for modern art, high ceilings, mirrored floors, a cold industrial beauty that reflected every shimmer of fabric and every anxious breath backstage. Models whispered final affirmations, assistants adjusted lights, and publicists rehearsed seating plans like generals mapping a war. Everything had to be flawless. Balenciaga's name carried weight, and the house had been working tirelessly to restore its prestige after past controversies. This show was meant to be redemption, a statement of purity, discipline, and artistic resurrection. The guest list reflected that ambition. Anna Wintour would arrive precisely at 10:58, dark sunglasses in place, her expression unreadable. Kim Kardashian, a Balenciaga muse, was set to occupy the first chair on the right, a symbolic gesture to show continuity with the brand's celebrity alliances. Dua Lipa, Bella Hadid, and a handful of European aristocrats filled out the rest of the A-list lineup. Every name had been approved by Pierpaolo Piccioli himself. Every seat was assigned. There were no surprises allowed, or so they thought. At 11:02, the calm shattered. The black SUV that rolled to a stop outside the venue wasn't on the approved manifest. Security hesitated. The driver flashed credentials that didn't match any of Balenciaga's issued passes. For a moment, there was confusion, until the door opened and Meghan Markle stepped out. The photographers reacted before the guards did. In a heartbeat, the air was alive with shudders and flashes. The energy shifted from poised anticipation to a frenzy of disbelief. Meghan stood in the doorway, adjusting her white jacket, her expression poised but tense. That practiced smile she'd perfected over years of public scrutiny. She looked radiant, yes, but also deliberate, as though every gesture had been choreographed for maximum effect. The security team scrambled. One guard spoke into an earpiece. "She's not on the list," he whispered. Another guard nodded but hesitated to intervene. How do you stop a duchess from walking into a fashion show? Especially one surrounded by 20 cameras. The only thing more scandalous than her uninvited arrival would be to publicly deny her entry. Inside, whispers rippled through the room like a shockwave. Assistants exchanged nervous glances. Is she supposed to be here? No, she can't be. But she's walking in. The tension was almost cinematic. Meghan's walk through the lobby was slow, steady, purposeful. She knew where every camera was. Her white suit was carefully chosen, understated yet commanding. The color of purity, the symbol of renewal. The contrast between her and the black-clad security team created a visual metaphor no photographer could resist. She looked like light invading shadow. Pierpaolo wasn't in the main hall yet. He was backstage reviewing the final lineup. The hum of controlled chaos surrounded him. Makeup artists working in rhythm, models rehearsing their final turns, stylists rushing with pins and clips. Then came the whisper. She's here. He didn't look up immediately. Who? Meghan Markle. For the first time that morning, Pierpaolo paused. The scissors in his hand stopped midair. She's where? In the front hall. She just arrived. Cameras are everywhere. He said nothing. Slowly, he set the scissors down and walked to the monitor. The live feed from the venue floor showed Meghan taking a seat 3 rows from the front. The staff had made a quick decision to avoid scandal by placing her away from the reserved section but still visible enough to keep the press contained. Her presence changed the entire tone of the event. Guests were whispering. Photographers were leaning over chairs for better angles. It was no longer Balenciaga's moment. It was hers. Pierpaolo's expression didn't change, but his silence spoke volumes. One assistant described the moment later. He wasn't angry in the loud way. He was angry in the quiet way. The kind that makes everyone around him stop breathing. The show began. Models glided across the runway. The soundtrack a deep, throbbing hum of minimal electronic beats. But the audience wasn't watching the clothes anymore. They were watching Meghan. Every turn of her head, every subtle smile, every movement of her hands became the real show. Cameras panned to her as often as to the models. The headlines were already being written in real time. For Meghan, the plan was working, at least for the moment. She'd reclaimed the spotlight in the most exclusive circle on Earth. It was a victory crafted from confidence and audacity. But for the people behind the show, it was a hijacking. Months of work, planning, and precision had been overshadowed by an unsanctioned guest. Backstage, Pierpaolo remained composed. He refused to let the disruption ruin the flow. Let the show finish, he said. We'll deal with it after. His tone was calm, but the assistants could feel the tension under every word. He watched the monitors until the final model walked off stage. Then, before the applause had even faded, he turned to his head of PR. Find out how she got in. That question would consume Balenciaga's team for the next several days. Witnesses later pieced together fragments of what happened. Some said Meghan had used a personal connection with one of the event photographers to gain access. Others claimed her team staged an arrive and pose scenario outside the venue, knowing the media frenzy would force Balenciaga's staff to accommodate her. Whatever the method, it worked. The photos flooded social media within minutes. Meghan Markle returns to Paris in stunning white ensemble. Duchess dazzles at Balenciaga show. Hollywood meets haute couture. The headlines were glowing at first, but within hours the tone began to shift. A single tweet changed everything. She wasn't on the guest list. That post came from a verified fashion journalist who had been covering the event for years. It wasn't gossip. It was fact. Within minutes, other reporters began confirming the same thing. Balenciaga had not listed Meghan Markle as an official guest. She wasn't on any seating chart. No publicist had been assigned to her. The story took on a life of its own. By evening, every entertainment outlet was running variations of the same question. Did Meghan crash Paris Fashion Week? The phrase "invited herself" appeared in headlines across Europe. Some saw it as bold. Others saw it as embarrassing. But one thing was undeniable. It became the most talked about moment of the entire fashion season. Behind the scenes, Pierpaolo's anger simmered into resolve. He wasn't going to lash out publicly. He didn't need to. Those close to him say he viewed the incident as a betrayal, not personal but professional. In a world where reputation defines everything, her stunt had disrupted the sacred order. He reportedly told one colleague, "Fashion is built on invitation. When you remove that, you remove respect." The next morning, internal meetings were held at Balenciaga's Paris headquarters. Emails were reviewed, call logs checked. No one could find a trace of authorization. One assistant quietly mentioned the messages, the ones that had come directly from Meghan weeks before, the ones Pierpaolo had ignored. Suddenly, everything made sense. The ignored messages, the sudden arrival, the photos, it wasn't random. It was orchestrated. For Meghan, however, the initial chaos might have felt like success. The photos were everywhere. She had managed to place herself at the center of the biggest fashion story of the month. But what she didn't realize was that in doing so, she had also alienated some of the very people whose acceptance she craved most. The fashion world thrives on discretion. They admire risk-takers, yes, but only when the risk feels elegant, not desperate. And for many inside those Parisian walls, this felt like desperation. Hours after the show, journalists began reaching out for comment. Balenciaga declined. Pierpaolo's office issued a polite statement thanking guests for attending, making no reference to Meghan at all. The omission was deliberate, a silent erasure that spoke louder than any denial could. Meanwhile, Meghan's team tried to keep up appearances. They leaked stories to lifestyle blogs emphasizing her support for sustainable fashion and her admiration for Pierpaolo's creative vision. But those narratives clashed with the facts now circulating among insiders. Her image of control was slipping. The most telling moment came a few days later, when Pierpaolo was interviewed by an Italian magazine about the challenges of modern fashion. The interviewer asked him about celebrity culture and the pressure to include big names in shows. His answer was brief. Fashion is an invitation to beauty, not a demand for attention. The industry understood the subtext immediately. What had started as a single uninvited appearance had now become a turning point. A symbol of how fame, entitlement, and insecurity collide in the world's most image-conscious arena. For Meghan, it was another lesson in how quickly control can vanish when every move is watched and every motive is questioned. Paris had given her a stage, but she hadn't been invited to perform on it. And as the applause faded and the stories multiplied, one truth became clear. In a world built on elegance, even the smallest misstep can echo louder than the most glamorous entrance. Pierpaolo Pacioli had seen chaos before. He had dressed queens, film stars, and icons who believed the universe revolved around their reflection. He had survived artistic feuds, boardroom battles, and the impossible demands of an industry that thrived on vanity. But this, what unfolded in Paris, felt different. It wasn't a scandal of fashion, it was a scandal of principle. In the days following the Balenciaga show, Pierpaolo withdrew into quiet focus. His routine didn't change. Morning espresso, early meetings, long hours sketching, fabric draped over mannequins, his hands still moving with the same calm precision. But beneath that calm, there was irritation. Not rage, not outrage, but the kind of deep disappointment that only a person of discipline can feel when someone else breaks rules they've spent a lifetime honoring. To understand his reaction, one must understand the man. Pier Paolo's reputation in the fashion world wasn't built on spectacle. It was built on restraint, on the belief that the truest form of power was silence, and the highest art was humility. In a business obsessed with noise, he was the quiet one who let his work speak. He believed in invitation, the ritual, the respect, the order of it. His world wasn't open to those who pushed. It opened to those who were invited with grace. That's why the Meghan incident cut so deeply. For him, it wasn't personal insult. It was a violation of the unspoken covenant between artistry and access. In fashion, an invitation is sacred. It's not just paper and ink. It's a gesture of inclusion into a world where every seat represents trust. To show up uninvited was to break the spell, to treat art like a stage for ego. In his studio days after the show, Pier Paolo walked among bolts of fabric and sketches pinned to the walls. The team spoke in hushed tones, pretending to focus on the next collection, but the tension was palpable. Assistants avoided eye contact. The PR director checked her phone every few minutes for updates. No one wanted to be the first to bring it up, but everyone knew the question lingering in the air. What would he do? He didn't speak of it immediately. For 2 days he said nothing. Then, late in the evening, as his small circle reviewed lookbooks, Pier Paolo closed the binder and said, "She used this house." The words were soft but final. The team waited. "Fashion is not a game," he added. "You do not use art as a disguise for hunger." Those who worked closely with him understood exactly what he meant. Meghan's appearance at the show wasn't a random mistake. It was calculated. It was a move designed to generate headlines, to align her image with the credibility of a legacy brand. But for Pier Paolo, that act turned something sacred into something transactional. To him, art and desperation could never coexist. Balenciaga's internal communication channels buzzed with quiet frustration. Some staffers felt embarrassed. "It made us look unprepared," one junior publicist confessed. "Like we'd lost control of our own show." Others were angrier. "It wasn't just her," another said. "It was what it represented. If people start thinking they can just walk in, what happens to the value of what we do?" Pier Paolo didn't respond to these complaints directly. He didn't need to. His leadership style was not one of loud directives but quiet example. He simply returned to work, sketching designs that reflected his inner turmoil. Sharper lines, colder tones, silhouettes that whispered defiance. Fashion was his language, and when he couldn't speak, he designed his emotions. Behind the scenes, the PR team debated damage control. Should they issue a statement denying that Meghan was invited? Should they confirm nothing and let the story die? In the end, Pier Paolo overruled the noise with a single sentence. "We say nothing. The truth will speak itself." It did. Fashion insiders began confirming details through their own networks. Editors at Vogue and Harper's Bazaar learned through mutual contacts that Meghan's outreach to Pier Paolo had been direct. Weeks before the show, she had allegedly sent a series of messages expressing admiration for his vision of inclusive luxury and suggesting a potential collaboration between her charitable initiatives and Balenciaga's global campaigns. The tone was polite, even charming, but to industry veterans it was transparent. It wasn't collaboration she wanted. It was visibility. The designer had seen it all before, celebrities treating fashion houses as props for self-reinvention. But this time, the act crossed from boldness into intrusion. Pier Paolo had chosen silence over confrontation, but he had never intended his silence to be mistaken for permission. When he first received the messages, he had glanced at them briefly and moved on. He didn't reply. His assistant had asked if she should respond with a polite decline. "No," he said simply. "Ignore it." It wasn't rudeness. It was principle. He didn't engage with anyone who tried to bypass the formal process. Balenciaga's system existed for a reason. Every guest, every collaboration, every public image went through a delicate choreography of approval. Meghan's outreach had skipped all of it. Now, seeing the fallout, Pierpaolo regretted one thing. Not that she came, but that he hadn't anticipated it. The modern world had blurred the boundaries between access and entitlement. What once required permission could now be forced through visibility. All it took was one viral photo. He understood that she had weaponized the thing he valued most, the public gaze. For years, Pierpaolo had warned younger designers that celebrity culture was eroding authenticity. The moment fashion stops being about craft, he once said, it becomes theater. And not good theater, bad theater. His point was simple. Art should not chase attention. Attention should chase art. Meghan's stunt was the antithesis of that belief. Inside Balenciaga, the whispers grew. Senior staff debated whether she should be formally blacklisted. Some argued that banning her outright would invite unnecessary drama. Others believed letting it slide would encourage more of the same. If we allow this, one executive said, every influencer will think they can storm the runway. Pierpaolo didn't raise his voice, but his decision was final. There will be no second time. It was the only statement he made on the matter internally. But everyone knew what it meant. The following week, the press caught wind of his demeanor. Journalists began describing him as uncharacteristically cold, disappointed, withdrawn. In truth, he was simply processing what the incident symbolized, the death of discretion. To him, fashion wasn't about opulence or fame. It was about connection between the artist and the audience. When Meghan turned that connection into a publicity stunt, it tainted something he held sacred. The headlines calling it a bold move only deepened his frustration. The world was celebrating what he saw as disrespect. Late one night, as he sat alone in his office, Pierpaolo reportedly confided to a close friend over the phone. They say courage is showing up, he said quietly. But sometimes, courage is knowing when not to. That line would later be paraphrased by critics writing about him. A poetic reflection of a man who believed that boundaries, not outside the studio, the media narrative continued to spiral. Photos of Meghan at the show still circulated online, but now they were accompanied by reports of her uninvited presence. Some outlets speculated that Pierpaolo was considering legal measures to prevent further misuse of Balenciaga's brand imagery. That wasn't true. He had no interest in lawsuits or public drama. But he did instruct the communications department to quietly review future access procedures. Among his peers, support poured in. Designers from other houses reached out privately. "You handled it with grace," one text read. Another said, "We all understand. Some people think fame is invitation." Those words resonated deeply. It wasn't just about one event, it was about a cultural shift. The old world etiquette of invitation, respect, and mutual admiration was being replaced by the ruthless immediacy of self-promotion. To Pierpaolo, Meghan had become the symbol of that shift. Not a villain, but a warning. In his next private team meeting, he addressed the issue one final time. "Let this remind us who we are," he said. "We build art, not opportunity." He paused. "When you give everyone a stage, the art disappears." The staff nodded. They understood that he wasn't only speaking about Meghan, he was speaking about the times they were living in. In the months that followed, Pierpaolo used the experience to shape his creative direction. His next collection, shown quietly in Milan, carried an unmistakable message. Gone were the flashy designs and celebrity muses. The models walked in minimalist attire, their faces bare, the music subdued. Each piece was structured, almost monastic, a statement against the noise. Critics praised it as a return to integrity. Some saw it as his subtle answer to the Paris incident. When an interviewer asked him afterward if recent events had influenced the collection, he smiled faintly and said, "Inspiration comes from life, sometimes from lessons." It was all he said. He didn't need to say more. Behind those few words lay everything he believed, that fashion, like respect, must be earned. That not every door should open just because someone knocks loudly enough. And that sometimes the truest power lies not in showing up, but in being invited. The rumors about Meghan's direct contact with Pier Paolo Pacioli had started as faint whispers in private conversations among fashion insiders. But by the time the Paris sun set for the third time after the Balenciaga show, those whispers had become something else entirely. A storm of speculation, screenshots, and leaked details spreading like wildfire through the digital veins of fashion media. It began, as most modern scandals do, with a leak. A journalist based in Milan, known for their uncanny accuracy about behind-the-scenes stories in luxury fashion, published a cryptic post. No names were mentioned, no brand explicitly tagged, but the message was unmistakable to anyone who had followed the events of that week. When a royal writes to a designer begging for access and the designer says no, but she shows up anyway, what do you call that? Confidence or chaos? Within hours, every major outlet was trying to confirm what everyone already suspected. Screenshots began circulating privately between editors. The messages were written in formal, polished language, but there was an unmistakable undertone of urgency, the kind of charm that carries the scent of pressure disguised as grace. Dear Pier Paolo, one of the leaked messages allegedly began, I have long admired your work and your fearless approach to redefining modern elegance. Your vision for inclusivity and artistic expression resonates deeply with me. As someone equally committed to empowering women and uplifting global creativity, I would be honored to attend your upcoming showcase in Paris to celebrate this shared mission. Polite, thoughtful, flattering, but also transparent. It wasn't just admiration. It was a request, a plea wrapped in diplomacy. The next message, dated 3 days later, carried a different tone. I completely understand how busy this season must be for you and your team. I only wish to be present in support of artistry and representation. If attendance is at capacity, I'm happy to stand in solidarity from the sidelines. Either way, please know that I deeply appreciate your work. Insiders who read the leaks described the phrasing as deliberately persuasive, a perfect blend of humility and expectation. It wasn't a simple RSVP inquiry. It was pressure, couched in politeness. And to a designer like Pier Paolo, who believed in silent respect over social maneuvering, the tone crossed an invisible line. The most controversial message came last. It was said to be shorter, more personal, and far less subtle. Art is at its best when it's inclusive. I hope to celebrate that message together in Paris. Let's make a statement the world will never forget. That line, let's make a statement the world will never forget, became the centerpiece of every headline that followed. To some, it sounded visionary. To others, it reeked of manipulation. Pier Paolo never confirmed the authenticity of the messages. He didn't have to. The accuracy of the phrasing, the timing, and the language matched his known email correspondence format too perfectly to be coincidence. And those close to him didn't deny it either. He was disappointed. One assistant admitted off the record. He said it felt like being courted for attention, not art. For Meghan's team, the leak was catastrophic. It painted her not as a victim of elitism, but as an instigator of intrusion. The tone of the public conversation flipped overnight. Where once people had defended her boldness, they now questioned her sincerity. Was it really about creative admiration, or was it just another bid for the spotlight? The scandal gained traction fast because it fit a larger pattern the public had already begun to recognize. A series of moments where Meghan seemed to insert herself into elite spaces without formal invitation. Whether in Hollywood circles, political events, or philanthropic galas, her name often appeared in contexts that blurred the line between ambition and overreach. This leak, however, was the first time written evidence existed to support the claim. The Milan journalist followed up with another post 2 days later. The messages were real. The designer's silence was his answer. What followed was a decision made in pride, not partnership. That was all it took. The story exploded. Screenshots, or at least fragments of them, began appearing in private chat groups and media Slack channels. Some were watermarked. Others looked suspiciously cropped, as if someone within Balenciaga's circle had sanitized them before release. But they all told the same story. Meghan had reached out directly, had been ignored, and had shown up anyway. For fashion insiders, this was unprecedented. Designers and celebrities often negotiate appearances quietly, through PR teams or brand liaisons. There's an unspoken etiquette, a dance of diplomacy that ensures both sides maintain dignity. Direct contact from a celebrity, especially one of Meghan's stature, was already unusual. But repeated contact after silence? That was taboo. Behind the scenes, Pier Paolo's reaction to the leaks was surprisingly calm. Those close to him described him as unmoved. He didn't want to add fuel to the fire. But the PR team insisted on discussing damage control, fearing that Balenciaga might appear ungracious if the public perceived the brand as having snubbed a global figure. Pier Paolo dismissed the idea. "The truth doesn't need explanation," he said simply. "We did nothing wrong." Meanwhile, Meghan's team scrambled to reframe the narrative. They reached out to sympathetic journalists, insisting that the messages were taken out of context, that her outreach had been part of a broader discussion about creative philanthropy. But when pressed for proof of such a project, they had none. The journalists backed off. The silence from Meghan's side only deepened the suspicion. Commentators began dissecting every word of the leaked texts. The phrase "shared mission" was analyzed as a deliberate attempt to align herself with Pier Paolo's brand. "Stand in solidarity from the sidelines" was interpreted as emotional manipulation, implying virtue while expecting compliance. And the now infamous "let's make a statement the world will never forget" became shorthand for calculated opportunism. But the story didn't stop there. A fourth message, reportedly unsent but found in a draft folder by someone close to the designer, surfaced days later. It read, "If this is not the right moment, I understand completely. But please know that I see your art as something revolutionary, the kind of work that makes women like me feel seen." That single unsent draft shifted the tone again. Suddenly, there was empathy. The words revealed vulnerability, a longing for validation from someone whose approval meant more than any headline. To some observers, that humanized her. To others, it only reinforced the idea that she was playing a psychological game, crafting messages that blurred the line between sincerity and manipulation. The debate split the public down the middle. Supporters called her a visionary woman shut out by elitist gatekeeping. Critics labeled her a master of emotional persuasion. And fashion commentators asked the question that cut deeper than gossip. What does it mean when power seeks validation instead of offering it? Inside Balenciaga's headquarters, the leaks caused internal discomfort. No one knew who was responsible. Some suspected a frustrated junior employee who wanted to expose what they saw as celebrity arrogance. Others believed the leak came from higher up, a subtle way for the brand to reclaim narrative control without issuing public statements. Either way, Pier Paolo didn't order an investigation. "Let it rest," he told his team. "We learn from this, not chase it." But he did make one quiet change. From that point on, all communication requests, whether from celebrities, influencers, or philanthropic figures, would go through his personal office rather than the public relations department. It was a return to old-world boundaries, a wall built not out of ego but out of necessity. As the controversy raged online, Pier Paolo continued his work. But those who knew him could sense the shift. The man who had once described fashion as an invitation to beauty now spoke of it as a refuge from noise. The Meghan incident had turned him inward, reaffirming his belief that art must protect itself from the world's hunger for relevance. Meghan, however, found herself facing an entirely different reality. Every PR effort to change the narrative only seemed to highlight her desperation. Fashion insiders began questioning whether other designers would risk inviting her in the future. "If she can't respect boundaries here," one stylist remarked, "how can you trust her with a brand?" Her silence didn't help. Weeks passed without a single public acknowledgement of the leaks. Not denial, not defense, nothing. It was as if she hoped the world would forget. But in the age of digital permanence, nothing truly disappears. The screenshots lived on, quoted, analyzed, archived. Months later, when Pier Paolo gave his next major interview, the journalist carefully asked him what he thought about fame crossing into art. His response was measured, his tone even. "When art becomes a vehicle for attention, it stops being art," he said. It becomes advertisement. Everyone knew what he meant. And so the leaked messages became more than a scandal, they became a parable. A story about the collision between self-promotion and sincerity. About how the pursuit of validation can destroy the very authenticity it seeks to claim. For Meghan, the cost wasn't just public embarrassment. It was credibility, a loss that no stylist, no speech, no charity gala could easily restore. Because in the world of high fashion, where reputation is stitched tighter than any seam, once the thread of integrity begins to unravel, the whole fabric falls apart. The air backstage at the Balenciaga Women's Wear Spring/Summer 2026 show had been charged even before Meghan Markle's arrival. For days, the team had rehearsed down to the second. Every light cue, every track of music, every walk synchronized in precision. Models were briefed not to smile, not to stumble, not to improvise. The show was meant to embody perfection, discipline, and silence, the antithesis of chaos. But the moment Meghan stepped through those doors, silence shattered. It began as a murmur, a sound out of place. One stylist glanced up from pinning a gown. Another assistant froze mid-step, holding a roll of garment tape in one hand. "Is that?" someone whispered. Then another voice, sharper this time. "She's not supposed to be here." Within minutes, the backstage communications network erupted. Security earpieces buzzed with overlapping messages. "Unlisted guest. Repeat, unlisted guest." The voice of the event coordinator came through, brittle with disbelief. Who approved her access? No one answered, because no one had. The room was a symphony of movement. Makeup brushes flicking, zippers closing, stylists crouched on their knees adjusting hems. But under that rhythm was panic. The models sensed it first. "What's happening?" one asked quietly, her voice trembling as an assistant adjusted her sleeve. "Someone just arrived," came the curt reply. "Someone who shouldn't have." It wasn't just about the uninvited presence. It was about control, and in the world of couture, control is everything. Every moment of a show like Balenciaga's is curated like a film. Lighting, camera angles, guest placement, each element forms a narrative. A disruption of that order is like a tear in silk. Small at first, but devastating in its implications. Backstage, Pierpaolo Pacioli stood by a screen showing the live feed from the venue. The image flickered for a second, then stabilized. There she was, Meghan Markle, poised in her white ensemble, surrounded by flashing cameras. His team went silent. Pierpaolo didn't speak. He simply stared. His jaw tightened slightly. One of the coordinators rushed over, voice low but urgent. "Should we ask her to leave?" she whispered. He shook his head. "No. The show must begin." The phrase was simple, but everyone recognized the tone. A warning cloaked in calm. No chaos would be allowed to disrupt his creation. As the lights dimmed and the first model stepped onto the runway, Meghan had already become the center of gravity. The photographers couldn't resist. Every camera, every lens in the room found her. The flashes illuminated her like she was part of the show. A guest who had rewritten the script in real time. Behind the scenes, the tension was unbearable. The head of PR whispered into her phone, "Do not let this escalate. Let her sit. We'll deal with it later." Assistants whispered updates into their radios. A security guard was stationed discreetly near Meghan's row, not to escort her out, but to prevent further disruptions. It wasn't a fashion show anymore. It was damage control in real time. Pierpaolo's focus, however, remained absolute. He watched his models glide through the runway, their dresses whispering against the floor. His art unfolded flawlessly, as if nothing had gone wrong. But inside, he knew the show's purity had already been compromised. No matter how perfect the designs, the headlines tomorrow wouldn't read, "Balenciaga redefines beauty." They would read, "Meghan Markle steals the spotlight." When the final model completed her turn and applause filled the hall, Pierpaolo didn't step out for his traditional bow. Instead, he turned away from the monitors and walked toward the back corridor. His team followed quietly. The applause echoed faintly through the concrete walls. Hollow, distant, tainted. In the backstage holding area, Assistants were packing garments with mechanical precision, eyes darting nervously. Everyone knew what was coming, the debrief. Pierpaolo's debriefs were usually brief and measured, focused on adjustments and future improvements. But this time, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. He entered the room. Everyone fell silent. Who authorized her? His voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the noise like a scalpel. No one spoke. A junior staffer stammered, "Sir, we didn't know she was coming. Did someone confirm her name at the gate?" She arrived directly with the press, sir." Pierpaolo's eyes narrowed slightly. "With the press," he repeated. The words hung in the air like smoke. That explained everything. The access had been forced, not granted. He exhaled slowly. "Find out how." Quietly, the team dispersed like a tide pulling back. Within minutes, calls were made to venue security, PR contacts, and local press liaisons. The pieces began to fall into place. Meghan's team had orchestrated a press corridor outside the venue, coordinating with freelance photographers to ensure maximum visibility. It was a tactic used in Hollywood, not haute couture, and it had worked perfectly. By evening, photos of Meghan at the Balenciaga show flooded social media. She looked radiant, confident, composed, everything the press loved. But the story beneath the surface was already cracking. A junior intern, overwhelmed by the chaos, whispered to a colleague, "This is going to blow up, isn't it?" The colleague nodded grimly. "It already has." Meanwhile, inside Pierpaolo's office, the designer sat in silence, his hands resting on a notebook filled with sketches. He didn't rage or curse. Instead, he whispered, almost to himself, "Fashion should invite, not intrude." The assistant who overheard him didn't fully understand what he meant. Not yet, but she wrote the line down anyway. It would become famous later. In the hours that followed, the backstage corridors became an arena of quiet crisis management. Balenciaga's global communications director arrived, expression tight. "We have to respond," she insisted. "The story is everywhere." Pierpaolo didn't look up. "No," he said simply. "We don't feed noise. We let truth breathe." The communications director hesitated. "But the press will spin it. They'll make it look like we invited her." He turned his gaze to her, calm but unyielding. "Then let them. The truth is not afraid of misunderstanding." That was the moment everyone in that room realized something. This wasn't just about a seat at a fashion show. It was about philosophy. Pierpaolo was protecting more than his reputation. He was protecting the sanctity of his art from being consumed by spectacle. Outside, in the post-show cocktail reception, the atmosphere was electric but uneasy. Guests exchanged polite smiles while gossiping under their breath. "She just appeared," one editor said. "No one invited her." "Brilliant," another replied with a smirk. "She hijacked the world's most exclusive runway. That's power." Not everyone agreed. A veteran designer nearby shook his head. "That's desperation, not power. There's a difference." And that was the heart of the divide, one that would define the scandal in the weeks to come. To some, Meghan's appearance was a statement of independence. To others, it was an act of intrusion that exposed the cracks in celebrity culture. Backstage, as the last lights were dimmed and the crew began to dismantle the stage, Pierpaolo lingered near the runway. The once bustling space was now silent. He traced a hand along the edge of the set.